I am Dorothy Dowling, and welcome to It's Personal Stories, a hospitality podcast that highlights the inspiring journeys of leaders in the hospitality industry. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to personal empowerment. I am delighted to welcome Greg Schulze, Chief Commercial Officer at Expedia Group. Greg, it is such an honor to have you with us today.
Hi, Dorothy. It's so great to be with you and to be on this podcast.
Wonderful. Greg, we always like to start with having our advisors begin their story with their career journey. And I know you've had an extraordinary career journey working in the airline industry, your board work, and now you're shaping the future of travel at Expedia. I'm hoping you can take us back to the beginning and what sparked your passion for the industry, and what are the pivotal moments that shaped your journey to where you are today?
It does go back a ways. I've been at Expedia for 20 years in August. So a big
Wow.
anniversary celebration for me
Congratulations.
this year.
Mhm.
Thank you. And as you said, I was at American Airlines before that. So a long time in the travel industry. I actually studied industrial engineering in college and started my career working in manufacturing. So I worked for a steel company, and I actually loved that work and enjoyed the company, and it was a great first job out of college. But it was definitely not going to be the career that I wanted to pursue. And there were other things that I wanted to explore, but I really didn't know what. And this was in the 90s. There was a lot of change in technology, and I just felt like I needed to figure that out. So I did what many young people do, and I went to grad school. So
Okay.
I went to business school, and I found that to be helpful, probably as much as anything, just for the people that I met and the exploration that I was able to do during those 2 years. I actually read a book. You may know the book, What Color's Your Parachute? Do you know
Yep,
that?
I do remember
It's
that book.
it's an old book, but it's actually been updated. There are new revisions, and I have given it to my kids who are now in the early in their career. But the book forces you to really think about how you want your career and therefore your life to evolve. And I I did all of the exercises in the book. I literally drew how I could picture my life years down the road, and and thought a lot about what kind of career would enable that. And it's not hard to get from the dream phase into the travel industry, because many people like me, like you, like many of us in the industry, love to travel. And that was important. That was a fundamental part of why I chose to pursue a career in travel. But there was a lot more to it. I think the travel industry is incredibly interesting. It's diverse. There's all different types of paths you can take. I was, as I said, an engineer. I was doing a lot of data work. There's many jobs that require analytics and data. And so that's what I thought I would do. And my first year of business school, I actually did a summer internship at American Airlines. And that summer, I worked on the Net Savers program. Do you remember that?
I do.
The weekend promotions, and it was so fun because I was able to do analytics to decide what routes we should offer for the following weekend. And then I would see it in the email that would go out to me and my friends and millions. And it was really rewarding internship. And so I went back to American Airlines after business school. And I arrived in the late 90s, some good years, and then, of course, stayed through some bad years as well. September 11th, 2001 at American was really incredibly difficult for everyone in the industry. And then the struggle really to turn the company around to survive, really. And so those were difficult years, but really that era for airlines and American especially were super interesting. When I arrived, they were looking at more room throughout coach, which was really innovative idea. Turns out not good business, but it was, I think, really interesting. They were acquiring TWA at the time, so looking at the acquisition of that. There was just a lot going on. It was fascinating, but the airline industry is tough. I got an appreciation for the highs and lows of travel in that. And I was finishing that. My last job at American was in internet pricing. And I started working with some of the online travel agencies, Orbitz, Hotwire, Priceline, and then of course Expedia. And I got to know the people and really appreciated, especially Hotwire was really good at this. Expedia didn't own Hotwire at the time, but Hotwire was really good at bringing a revenue management approach to distribution. And I thought I was in revenue management at the time, and I thought these online travel agencies, they have a great product, great reach for customers, and they have incredible data and they can do real revenue management. And so I actually applied to several OTAs. I had a few options and I chose Expedia. So in 2005, I started at Expedia, actually in an analytical role. It was a much smaller company at the time, and I was responsible for transport, or actually just air analytics. And I was supporting the sales team, the commercial team that was doing negotiations with airlines. And so I got to see that whole aspect of the business, but I was heavily involved in the data and analytics, which was my comfort spot. And so that was my start at Expedia. And it's been an amazing 20 years since then.
Your career director at Expedia has really been outstanding, Greg, in terms of just the leadership you bring to the organization now. So I'm wondering if you can help us understand how you stay on top of your game, because this business is just so fast moving. And I know we were both at ITB recently, but just actually seeing the level of disruption and the kinds of changes that are happening in next gen distribution. How do you stay on top of it all?
Oof, it is moving fast, and it is a challenge as leaders and any one of us in the industry to really stay on top of what's happening with technology, but also just in the industry commercially, what's happening around the world, because travel is so closely linked with geopolitical and economic factors as well. And that's one of the reasons why it's fascinating industry. You can never be bored, that's for sure.
Yes.
And as a leader, I think the key for me is I talk about in my family, and we talk about it at work, the concept of holding on loosely. There are certain principles that are going to be foundational and really important, and those you want to really guard closely and hold on to. But then there's some that you're going to be a little loose, you're going to hold on to, but maybe a little loosely, knowing that just what got us here is not going to get us there. And that's certainly the case always with technology. And people always talk about disruption in technology, and technology is inherently disruptive. So it's critical, if you want to be relevant, to be using technology that is relevant. And so it's really important to have an open mind and to see that. But it's not just technology. I'd say just generally leadership principles you have to hold on loosely. Every role requires something different. Every even season is different. When things are good, you're maybe having different leadership principles than when times are tougher. It is constantly evolving, as you say, and the best leaders, I think, will be very aware of that and open to that.
I love that framing of holding on loosely to drive that flexible mindset. Greg, I think that's a brilliant framing of it. So thank you for sharing that.
There's a good song with that too.
Yeah.
You can play that in the background.
Yeah. I'm wondering, I know that probably is one of your leadership philosophies, but I'm wondering if there's been pivotal mentors or other leadership philosophies that have really influenced your career. And you have a very large team at Expedia, so I'd love to understand how you pay that forward to your team in terms of the mentorship that has been afforded to you.
Wow, Dorothy, there's so many great people in the travel industry, and I've had the privilege of working for many of them and alongside many. And going back to American, I had some great friends. We were all lunch buddies, Kurt Stache, Derek DeCross, Kenji Hashimoto, Charlie Sultan. These were my buddies at American. And I still think American produces some of the best talent in the industry, and some great people, and people who have gone on to do other big things. Krieger was my head of revenue management, went on to be CEO of Virgin Atlantic, and with Maria Sebastian, who was there. Dennis Corrigan, who's now at IHG, was my boss when I was an intern at American. So some good people. I was hired at Expedia by a man named Paul Brown, and Paul went on, he left Expedia a few years later and he was president of Hilton and then became CEO of Arby's, and now runs a company called Inspire Brands that owns Dunkin' Donuts and a bunch of food companies. But I mentioned Paul because he was an amazing leader and established at Expedia in the early days there, this commercial team that I now lead. And Paul taught me many things about work generally, but certainly about how to build partnerships and how to handle tough negotiations and all the other things that we encounter. I worked for him, then Dara Khosrowshahi, who's now CEO at Uber and an incredible CEO, one of the best operators. He gets credit for doing a lot at Uber and Expedia as CEO, but he's got that rare talent of he's high level as a CEO and then goes very deep into the business, into the operations, and Dara super at that. And actually, I will say, and I don't know if this is okay, but I will say that my current boss has a lot of the same qualities and is an amazing leader and boss, Ariane Gorin. And Ariane and I both worked for Dara at different times, and she would say the same thing. He's taught us a lot. He's actually still on our board as well. It's good to have his leadership as well. So really, and I will say, Dorothy, and you talked about the team. I have people that work for me who I think are some of the most incredible leaders, and not just my directs on my leadership team, but down into the organization. You've met some of them and know that, and it's not unique to Expedia. I do think that we have exceptional talent at Expedia, but it's really important. And I've learned as I've grown in this organization to keep my eyes open to nurture talent, because there are people throughout these big organizations who just need a chance and need to be given the opportunity to excel and to step up into bigger opportunities. So I really have learned from some of the best, and I can say that I work with some of the best today.
You do have an amazing team, Greg, and one of the things I have great respect for is how you have enhance the team by bringing in subject matter experts from particular areas in the travel category that can really bridge a lot of the partnership activations that you do. They bring so much value creation in terms of really understanding the business and the partner needs, and then trying to figure out how to co-innovate together. So I commend you for your nurturing of those individuals and for bringing them onto your team.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's interesting. Expedia was part of Microsoft. People might not know that it started as
I remember those days too.
Yeah, and you remember that there were a lot of tech people who were awesome at building the technology, and they started Expedia. And they would go and try to talk to hotels or airlines, and it was sometimes just a miss. And not to take away from them, they did it me. Like the founders of Expedia, I don't knock, but around when I started, it was when we were starting to hire more domain experts. So I was, for a long time, the air guy at Expedia, and since then we've hired many great hoteliers, revenue managers, and car rental operators. And it does, like that mix of people with broad experience and deep domain experience is really valuable on a team, and nurturing that and helping us learn from each other is really critical.
No, I agree, Greg, and I commend you for that. I'm wondering if we can expand on that a little bit, because Expedia is definitely an innovator and you have a culture of innovation. I'd love to hear how you balance that fostering of that innovative culture, but still driving to the operational excellence in terms of performance, because you are a publicly traded company, there's high expectations. I'd love to
We do
understand how you
report
bridge
quarterly.
that. Yes.
We do. And there are some quarters where we wish that we were private, but for the most part, you accept that as a public company, your short-term results are relevant. And we talk a lot about the importance of doing both, doing well, both in the short term and the long term, and what that means. And ideally, you have a solid operational foundation, and then you are layering in innovation and longer term strategy. That is a natural layer. It's not one or the other. And but I find that it does sometimes require a push, either to focus a little bit more on the short term, or to actually step out of that for a moment to look at strategy, the longer term, whatever that might be, innovation. And as you said, innovation is accelerating and the world is changing quickly. And so we need to make sure that we're keeping up with that. And so maybe it's good. Maybe the technology is allowing us to have more longer term impact and vision in the short term. But I'm reading a book actually on AI that's quite good, and so you hear it's called Co-Intelligence: Living and Working with AI. I can recommend it.
Okay.
And it tells a story about how with AI as a technology, it's not a product per se. And so a lot of what it will enable will be software products, and you can wait for normal product development to happen, and that product will come and it will meet a need over the next couple years. But AI is also a tool or a technology that people can use today, and people are using for many different aspects every day. We're using it. And if we allow our people to actually use that in the short term, they're going to get better short-term results that lead to a better longer term outcome. And it's not to say that we shouldn't invest in tools like Salesforce or whatever that are building great AI products, but it's also important just to put the technology in the hands of the people who are going to use it today.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important message to the audience, Greg, because I do think everyone connects dots differently. So I think experiencing some of those AI products and using it in their day to day so that then they can connect dots that potentially from a commercial perspective might enhance the way you go to market. So I agree. It is about embracing and learning and co-innovating on these kinds of options together. That leads me into another question about how do you personally continue to stay on top of your game, how you really build that information pipeline for yourself, given the size of the role that you have, the amount of travel that you do. You've got a lot on your plate. So how do you stay sharp?
Thank you for assuming that I am staying sharp. I definitely try, but business is moving fast, and we have probably more than ever, we have flexibility in our work lives, and that has had a lot of good benefits, but it's also led to this 24/7, 365-day culture of work, and that can be exhausting. And then later on, as you and I both do, we travel a lot, and that takes a lot from you as well. So I think for effectiveness, to stay sharp, and really just for your health, your mental, your physical, social health, you have to figure out that balance. And balance is definitely a very personal thing. An individual has to figure out what works for them. For me, flexibility has been really good. And I raised 2 kids through Expedia and did a ton of travel during that. And we always made it work, and I think worked pretty well. It's also important to remember that as you're prioritizing your life, to remember that we're all replaceable. And for the long term, but also in the short run, that Expedia will go on if I take a day off. And it's sometimes hard to do, but important to remember. And then I would say I have found work enhances my life. My life is definitely richer because of the work that I do. But I would find it depressing if work were my only thing. And so I want to keep that balance to stay physically and mentally, socially healthy.
Greg, I appreciate you being so self-aware and being so open to sharing your self-awareness with everybody that's listening and watching this, because there's two messages that I heard. One is sometimes we do get caught up in terms of the work and how important we think we are to actually achieving results. But that whole element that a day off and the company will be just fine, I think is a really good message. And I think the other is about integrating work into your life and how it has really enhanced your life in general in terms of how you feel about yourself and your learning and your journey, but also with your family. So I do think about that reflection that we all have to be aware of what gives us joy and understanding how to build some of that harmony in what we do. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think a leader of your level in the organization sharing that's an important message to people that maybe a little less optimized in their career just yet, so that they understand that it's okay to do some of these things and take a vacation and take time off for their family and their own well-being.
Yeah, for sure. And we all have the opportunity to show up really well when we're here. So the day off is not going to hurt you. Just make sure that my son is working a job that has shifts now, and like if you have to start at 5 a.m. and there's a snowstorm, you got to figure out how to get there at 5 a.m. in the snowstorm. And
Yeah.
I think that is really important. And then enjoy the satisfaction of a job well done. And yeah, that's good.
Yeah. No, I think understanding that joy of work and bringing that forward. And then the message that you're sending to your son about that responsibility that others are counting on you. So you have to figure it out in terms of
That's right.
making sure you deliver for your team. I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about rising leaders, speaking of your son, because they're often put into high pressure decision-making situations and often don't have all the information they need. And sometimes they have to make leadership decisions in these uncertainty kinds of environments. I'm wondering if you have any advice you could share with them.
Yeah, leadership is all about decision making and driving clarity. And everybody's been part of that team or that company, that group, that where it's just always vague, ambiguous, and you spend so many cycles just talking and looking at PowerPoint slides, and that's really not leadership, not decision making. And if you're not making decisions, then you're not really much of a leader, I would say. I had a mentor who told me once, he was this kind of crusty old, I was working in manufacturing, and he said to me, and I was just like, tell me your wisdom. I just want to have a good career. What do I need to do along the way? What job should I take next? I was looking for like the formula. And he flipped it around and said, there's really not much difference between you and me. And we had 30 years difference in our career. So it was a little surprising. He said, the biggest difference is the access I have to information and the guts to make a decision. And that just really stuck with me. I think about that all the time. I have incredible access to information. I'm drowning in data every day. I have people coming to me with reports here and assessments there. And what they're looking for is for me to make a decision or to empower them to make a decision. And so that is really leadership. And we, I think, do ourselves a favor, do our companies, our organizations a favor if we're willing to take that risk, because you don't always get it right. Sometimes you make decisions and they turn out to be a mistake, and you have to live with the consequences, the good and the bad.
I love the way you framed that up in terms of having the guts to make a decision and making the best decision one can make based on the information that you have, Greg. And thank you. So, Greg, I'm wondering, I know earlier you have identified about how you really support hiring talent across many different disciplines, but given the nature of Expedia being a technology company and the integration of sales, marketing, distribution, your loyalty program, how do you really foster that sense of cross-disciplinary knowledge with your team and drive their growth?
The first thing is that I would say is it is amazing to be in a commercial role in the travel industry. And because we are all dependent on each other for our success. And so the a commercial leader, a commercial person in travel industry is looking for win scenarios. And we have at Expedia Group, we did over $110 billion of bookings last year. So there many millions of transactions, and every one of those transactions has some sort of commercial element to it. We have negotiated a commission, or we have arranged for certain policies or procedures to be followed, or we're talking about how we're promoting, and all of those have to be something that creates value for our partner, and obviously we hope for us. That is the setup. Now, you mentioned before how we've hired in domain experts, and I think it's really important that when you are talking to a hotel, that you understand what how the hotel business works, and how the operations of a hotel are in real life, not just in the contract or on paper. So we think about, if we're going to ask a hotelier to use our tool, we have to understand, is this going to be used by somebody who's working the front desk and they have 16 other things to do while we're asking them to enter something into our portal? We have to understand all that. It is important that they have that domain expertise, but at the same time, we learn from each other. So we try to move people around. And I'd say in the past, we struggled a little bit with silos, to where you were, like I said, I was an air guy for a long time, or you were in hotels. And I would say maybe not silos, but we were tribes. We were prideful tribes too, where we all thought that we had the best area or the most expertise. And so getting that balance, right, of domain expertise and cross-functional knowledge and experience is really important. So we are actually trying to move people across. So now the woman who runs our global accounts, she had worked on air before. The leader of our large market management team, she worked in market management for a while, and then she went and led the car team, and then she added air. Now she's back to leading the entire global market management team. So those are helpful because you learn from different parts of the business. And there are things that we can do to help people learn. We have what we call project gigs. So you may sign up for a 6-month project, and you actually work temporarily on that other team, and you get exposure to that team. And that's quite popular experience at Expedia, and it definitely helps with career growth. So we're always trying to develop people broadly, while at the same time encouraging them to really go deep into their domain.
I love the way that you talk about that intentional career development, about building that cross-functional capability across different domain areas, Greg. But I really like this idea of these project gigs too, so that people can test out a particular area and really build upon some of their learning and competencies. So thank you for sharing that. That's a great thing we can
It
all
is,
learn.
and it does help with that career mobility as well, because it gives you confidence. But also, we did have a hard time where the air team only wanted to hire people from the air team, and hotel team from the hotel, and that sort of thing. But this gives you a chance to test someone, and for them to prove that they can do this. So it's a great program.
Yeah, and I think it's just the breadth of Expedia. I think it allows people to present to your clients in so much more effective ways. So thank you for sharing that. I think we could all think about our organizations and see how we could map to some of those opportunities. So we're coming near the end of the interview, Greg, and there's a few things we always like to ask each of our advisors. One is really if you could give one piece of advice to emerging leaders in the travel and hospitality industry, what would that be?
First, be thankful that you found this industry. It is a great one. And then I would say, for advice, stay connected. This is an industry, a business of people and connection. And there are so many great people like you, who give of your time freely, and who are looking for building relationships. And That's so valuable. And so that's really important. It's also something that happens outside of your walls, of your company walls. So I would say go visit partners, attend conferences. You and I were both at ITB. Those conferences are incredible, the big ones and the smaller ones. Join industry groups, find out where you can connect into the industry, because human connection. Simon Sinek was at our last partner conference, and he talked. I had the privilege of interviewing him on stage. He's much better at this than I am, Dorothy, but
Yes, he is
he
the best.
he is the best. And but he talked about, we were talking about travel, and he just spoke so well about the industry, really understood it well. And he talked about how technology is changing the industry, but how human connection can be a superpower in this technology-enabled world. And I really, that stuck with me, because we're a technology company, and so we have to invest in all the latest tech, and we have whatever 8,000 engineers, and that's great. And all of us people are a superpower. We need to make sure that we do that.
I love that framing of human talent being the superpower, because I do think that connection with each other is something that really does elevate all of our capabilities. I'm wondering, if you think about your leadership impact at Expedia, what do you hope your legacy will be?
I'm not quite at the point in my career yet where I'm talking about legacy, but I
Okay.
think Expedia is getting my best, probably my last. I love this company, and I will be happy if this company, Expedia Group, is my legacy, my business legacy, and incredibly grateful that the work that I do can impact so many people, thousands of Expedia employees and their families, as well as our partners. And this is work, as I described earlier, that has enriched my life in incredible ways. And so for me to be able to give some of that to every Expedia employee is amazing. It's a heavy burden that we as leaders carry, because the good is sometimes offset with bad. And it's really a burden, but at the same time, a real privilege to be able to create an environment where people can come and do their best work and live their best lives.
If I may offer something back to you, Greg, one of the things I value so much about you is just your genuine likability, your authenticity, and you are an incredibly humble individual. And I just think the way you approach people on such a human level, I think it paves the way for others to emulate you in the way you offer that, in terms of how people might follow in your footsteps. So that's what I
Thank you,
think your
Dorothy.
legacy. So
Thank you. I'll take that. Thank you.
yeah, yeah, you're pretty amazing. So I have one final question I'd love to ask, which I think goes back to the earlier things. Is there any particular podcast? I know you offered your book, but anything else that you would say to help people continue their journey of leadership and strategic thinking evolution?
Of course, the It's Personal Stories podcast. Um,
Thank you.
of course. And I do love the format of this podcast. It is great to go deep into the stories, because it can be inspiring in one way or another. And I love the diversity of guests that you have on the podcast as well. It's been really great. And of course, especially throughout your career, you want to keep up on industry news. There's so many resources available for this, the standard daily newsletters, and read as much as you can, get out there and talk to people at conferences and that sort of thing. But the last thing I would say is, this gets to the human superpower. And I regret now that I showed you that my Kindle has this book on it, because I read probably 90% of what I read is fiction. And I would encourage everybody to, it's part of that balance piece, where we get so much of the pressure of the day, of the what's happening, what happened last week, and what are we going to do for this quarter's results, and just all that pressure of delivering day in, day out. And you need to be able to have a broader view of life and of the world. And I think reading good fiction it's been a big part of that for me. And ultimately, as AI advances, as the robots take over the world. They're going to need us humans to keep them company. And we want to be interesting and well-read, I would say. Make sure that you find that balance.
I think that is great advice because it helps us keep things in perspective, Greg. So thank you for sharing that. So if I may, I'd like to offer our gratitude to Greg for this inspiring conversation today. It's been a real privilege to hear about your journey and learn from you. So thank you, Greg. And
thank you. It was a pleasure to be with you, Dorothy, and always great to see you.
Thank you, Greg. And if I could also thank our audience and say, if you've enjoyed this interview, I hope you will come and visit us on our website, itspersonalstories.com, where you will see webcasts and podcasts from other great industry leaders like Greg that will empower your knowledge and fuel your spirit. So we hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thanks.